On the evening of March 19th, 2003, at 9 p.m., the parents of Ji Yuanyuan dialed their son's familiar phone number, as they always did, to check on how he was doing in Beijing, China. But that night, the phone just kept ringing, over and over, with no answer. At first, the elderly couple didn't think much of it, assuming their son was probably busy with something or simply hadn't heard the phone. They told themselves they'd call back later. But the next evening, when they tried again, their son's phone still went unanswered. This time, worry began to creep into their hearts. 2 consecutive days without being able to reach him, that wasn't normal at all. They couldn't sit still, their minds racing with all sorts of thoughts, until finally they couldn't take it anymore. They decided they had to go see for themselves at the apartment their son was renting in Beijing's Haidian district. On the morning of March 21st, the elderly couple arrived at their son's apartment door. They knocked repeatedly, but there was no response from inside. With help from the building management, Yuanyuan's parents finally got the door open. But the moment that door swung open, the sight before them left them frozen in shock, then utterly devastated. Their son, Yuanyuan, was tied tightly to a chair in the middle of the room. His body was covered with knife wounds, some deep, some shallow, the blood long since dried to a dark brown. His body was cold and stiff. Clearly, he had been dead for quite some time. In a state of panic and overwhelming grief, the elderly couple fumbled with trembling hands to call the police. Police arrived at the scene quickly after receiving the emergency call. The small apartment was immediately sealed off, and the forensic team got to work. During evidence collection, they discovered a clear fingerprint left at the scene, an important lead. But what really caught the investigators' attention was the method of killing. The way the victim was bound, the location and characteristics of the knife wounds on Yuanyuan's body were almost identical to 4 other male homicide cases that had occurred in Beijing over the previous 3 months. When compared, the similarities between the cases were undeniable. Of the 4 previous cases, 2 had occurred at the victims' homes, 1 was discovered in a public men's restroom, and the last in an open wasteland area. All the victims were male, and there was one notable common feature: none of the crime scenes showed clear signs of struggle. This suggested the victims may have known their killer, or at least had their guard completely down before being attacked. Faced with this evidence, police quickly realized these weren't isolated incidents, but very likely serial murders committed by the same perpetrator. They decided to merge all the cases into a single investigation. Through careful examination of the social relationships and daily activities of the 5 victims, investigators gradually pieced together crucial connections. They discovered 3 significant commonalities among all the victims. First, all were gay men. Second, they all had an interest in SM. That is, they enjoyed forms of physical and mental domination or submission in sexual relationships. And third, all of them frequently socialized in Beijing's gay chat rooms. These 3 connections weren't coincidental. They indicated the killer was targeting a specific group. Following this lead, police decided to narrow the investigation, focusing on gay men who had online contact with the 5 victims. They began tracing every conversation, every virtual relationship. After nearly 2 weeks of painstaking review, one name kept appearing repeatedly: Li Yijiang, a 24-year-old young man. He quickly became a person of interest. During verification, investigators gathered considerable suspicious information about him. Witnesses living near the area reported frequently seeing Yijiang bringing different men back to the apartment he was renting at number 12, Liufang Nanli Dongjimen. Notably, these men were always different. Sometimes he would even bring multiple different men home in a single night. More importantly, when police checked the QQ chat histories of the victims, they found all of them had chatted with Yijiang about SM-related content before their deaths. Some messages even clearly recorded the times and locations of their meetings. On the afternoon of April 4th, 2003, after gathering sufficient evidence and leads, police decided to act. A task force was dispatched to the building where Yijiang was renting, prepared to execute an arrest warrant. What happened next was completely unexpected. Just as they reached the building entrance, the officers spotted a casually dressed young man leisurely walking a small dog around the courtyard. The police approached, intending to ask a few probing questions to confirm his identity before making their move. But before they could speak, the young man turned to look at them with an eerily calm expression and asked, "Are you looking for me?" "I'm Li Yijiang." His composure left the officers stunned. Facing the police, Yijiang showed no fear or any intention to resist. He simply said calmly that he wanted to go upstairs to get some personal belongings. Then he would accompany them to the station. In the interrogation room, Yijiang sat across from the investigators. Facing each question from the police, Yijiang showed no tension, made no attempt to deny or shift blame. He straightforwardly admitted everything, confirming he was the one who had killed the 5 men in the cases under investigation. No evasion, no excuses. He recounted each murder as if describing ordinary events in his life. At the same time, the forensic results came back. The fingerprint collected at Yuan Yuan's crime scene was a perfect match for Yijiang's. Physical evidence and the suspect's confession aligned perfectly. The case seemed ready to close. The investigators breathed a sigh of relief, thinking their work was nearly done. But right then, Yijiang opened his mouth and revealed something that left the entire interrogation room in stunned silence. He confessed that the case of a middle school student murdered in 1994 in Changji City, Xinjiang, a case that had remained unsolved for nearly 10 years, was also his doing. The investigators looked at each other, unable to believe what they'd just heard. The young man sitting before them appeared gentle, even somewhat shy, but behind that harmless exterior lay 6 lives, spanning 9 years from when he was just a teenager to now. So what exactly had driven him step by step down this bloody path? Yijiang was born in 1980 in Beijing's Mentugu district, into a family already fractured beyond repair. Even before he was born, his mother had been diagnosed with schizophrenia. When Yijiang was still a baby, his parents packed up and took his 2 older brothers to live in Changji City, Xinjiang. Yijiang was sent to live with his aunt, who was relatively well off financially. A child separated from his biological parents from infancy, growing up dependent on others' care sounds like an unfortunate beginning. But ironically, the time spent with his aunt would turn out to be the warmest and happiest period in Yijiang's entire life. His aunt was a kind and caring woman. She treated her nephew like her own child, looking after him in every way. Materially, she never let him want for anything. More importantly, he was loved. In his aunt's home, Yijiang experienced a warmth he would never find again. In 1992, his aunt's family suddenly faced a major crisis and could no longer afford to raise Yijiang. The 12-year-old boy had no choice but to pack his bags and go to Changji City, Xinjiang, where his biological parents and 2 older brothers lived. This should have been a reunion. He should have been happy to return to his flesh and blood. But reality was the complete opposite. In his own parents' home, Yijiang became a stranger, an outsider. His 2 older brothers had grown up together for 12 years, while Yijiang, the youngest brother they barely knew, suddenly appeared and intruded into their lives, making them uncomfortable. They didn't welcome their brother. Instead, they were cold and distant. They never invited him to eat with them, never played with him. But that wasn't even the worst of it. What truly made Yijiang's life a living hell was his mother with schizophrenia. Her condition was unstable, fluctuating like unpredictable weather. On her good days, she could cook for the family and manage household chores like a normal mother. But when episodes struck, she would smash things around the house, scream and curse, and Yijiang frequently became the target of her inexplicable rage. Some nights, while Yijiang was sound asleep, she would suddenly burst into his room, grab him and drag him from his bed to the floor, beating him mercilessly. The entire family's financial burden fell on the father's shoulders. He had to work hard to support his wife and children while dealing with caring for a mentally ill spouse. The mounting pressure made his temper increasingly irritable and uncontrollable. After coming home from work each day, his only entertainment was a bottle of liquor. And when the alcohol took hold, he would unleash all his frustrations on his wife and children through beatings and verbal abuse. In that home, Yijiang was completely alone. Whenever his mother had an episode and beat him, his two older brothers never intervened. They would just quietly retreat to their rooms, close the doors, and pretend they heard nothing, saw nothing. Sometimes it was even worse. When they thought Yi Jiang had made their mother angry, they would join in beating him. In that home, no one stood by his side, no one protected him. To escape the violence, Yi Jiang tried everything to stay away from home as long as possible. Every day, before dawn had fully broken, he would wake up and head to school early. After class, he volunteered to stay and clean the classroom, wipe down desks and chairs, sweep the schoolyard. He deliberately dragged out the time, doing everything slowly, just to avoid returning to that terrifying house. Only when it was completely dark, when there was no excuse left to stay at school, would he reluctantly drag his feet home. For a long time, school became Yi Jiang's only refuge. There, he was a completely different person. Teachers looked at him with affection, praising him for being hardworking and responsible. Classmates liked him for his enthusiasm and willingness to help others. He was voted class president by his peers. The feeling of being recognized and respected was something Yi Jiang had never experienced in his own home. When Yi Jiang entered middle school, amid a home life full of violence and suffering, he found a rare ray of light. It was a classmate surnamed Tang. Tang became his only emotional support, the only person who made him feel heard and understood. At first, Yi Jiang approached Tang simply as a friend. They talked, shared, spent time together. But gradually, over time, the feelings inside Yi Jiang began to change. Friendship slowly transformed into something deeper, more intense. He realized he had fallen in love with Tang. In early 1994, having just turned 14, Yi Jiang could no longer hold back. He decided to confess his feelings to Tang. But Tang's reaction was nothing like what he had hoped for. Tang didn't just flatly reject him. He showed disgust, insulted him, and berated him with cruel words. For a 14-year-old already carrying so many wounds, that brutal rejection was like a knife straight to the heart. Anger, humiliation, and feelings of betrayal began to build inside Yi Jiang, growing day by day. He felt Tang had betrayed the bond between them. On the night of February 21st, 1994, Yi Jiang used the excuse of having something to give Tang and lured him to a secluded garden behind the school. There, in the darkness, he pulled out a fruit knife he had prepared beforehand and killed his classmate. 10 days later, Tang's body was discovered. The autopsy revealed over 100 stab wounds. Based on the forensic findings, investigators determined the killer had limited physical strength and clearly lacked experience. That's why so many stabs were needed to ensure the victim was dead. From this, police deduced the killer was likely young, probably a classmate of Tang's. An investigation was launched, and Yi Jiang was among those questioned. But he had a perfect cover. At school, he was a model student, beloved by teachers and trusted by classmates. No one could believe such a well-behaved, hard-working boy could do something so brutal. Moreover, Yi Jiang could clearly account for his whereabouts before and after the crime, and police couldn't find any direct evidence against him. In the end, Yi Jiang was removed from the suspect list. The murder of Tang became a cold case. In December 1994, about half a year after killing Tang, Yi Jiang accidentally bumped into an adult man on his way home from school. He was about to apologize and continue on his way, but instead of getting angry or blaming him, the man was friendly, smiled warmly, and cordially invited him to dinner. For a 14-year-old living in constant fear of his own home, that invitation seemed like an escape. Yi Jiang didn't want to go home, didn't want to face the senseless beatings from his mentally ill mother. Without much thought, he agreed to go with the stranger. At the table, the man appeared generous and attentive. The man then said he would take him home, but instead of taking the boy to a safe place, he took Yi Jiang to a secluded park and abused him. When Yi Jiang woke up, he found himself lying in the darkness, his body in pain and aching. He dragged his battered body home, carrying shame and suffering he couldn't tell anyone about. After that night, a flame of hatred ignited inside Yi Jiang. He wanted revenge. For more than 2 weeks afterward, every day he carried a knife hidden in his school bag and went to stake out the road where he had met that man. He waited, patient and full of hatred, ready to strike the moment he saw the one who had violated him. But day after day, that man never appeared again. He seemed to have vanished completely from Yijiang's life, leaving behind only rage with no outlet and a psychological wound that would never heal. When Yijiang entered high school, his mother's mental condition gradually stabilized after receiving medication. She no longer had the violent episodes she'd had before, but fate didn't seem to want to give him peace. As the violence from his mother decreased, the violence from his father escalated worse than ever. His father maintained his habit of drinking every night after work, and his drunken episodes became increasingly severe. When the alcohol took over, he would unleash all his frustrations, failures, and pressures on his wife and children. Every time Yijiang witnessed his drunken father beating his mother, he couldn't just stand by and watch. But the result of his courage was usually both mother and son getting beaten together. Sometimes the father's rage would exceed all limits. He would grab a kitchen knife and chase Yijiang through the house. Yijiang had to run for his life, fortunate that he was young and agile enough to never get hurt. Living in such a family environment, combined with the accumulated trauma from his past, Yijiang gradually realized no one was coming to save him. He had to save himself. And the only path he could see was education. Yijiang poured all his energy into his studies, turning education into his escape route. He had only one goal: pass the college entrance exam, leave this house of suffering behind, and start a new life. In 1999, after years of relentless effort, with the second highest score in all of Changji City, he was admitted to Beijing Institute of Technology. Finally, he could leave that violent home behind, leave Changji City, and start a new life in Beijing. In the university environment, Yijiang maintained the same personality he'd had in high school, treating everyone around him with warmth and sincerity, always ready to help friends in need. He was the type who kept his word and valued loyalty, making everyone want to befriend him. Additionally, he had a skill that greatly impressed his classmates. He was an excellent cook. According to his college friends, Yijiang often cooked for the group, and everyone had to admit his cooking was even better than restaurant food. With his pleasant appearance and likable personality, it was no surprise Yijiang attracted female attention. One girl persistently pursued him for over 2 months. Every time they met, she brought carefully prepared gifts, clearly expressing her feelings. But no matter how hard she tried, Yijiang always gently but firmly turned her down. After being repeatedly asked by curious friends about his reasons, Yijiang finally admitted the truth. He was gay. Notably, this confession didn't affect his relationships with classmates at all. Everyone still liked him just as before. However, behind his cheerful and sociable exterior, Yijiang was bearing an enormous financial pressure. He was determined not to spend a single cent from his family, not wanting any debt or connection to that painful home anymore. So from his second semester of freshman year, he started working part-time in the back kitchen of a KFC. The work was exhausting and the pay wasn't high, so sometimes he had to work alternating shifts at 2 different KFCs to make enough money for tuition and living expenses. The demanding schedule left him nearly exhausted, sleeping only 3 to 4 hours each day. In June 2002, while browsing the internet at an internet cafe as usual, he accidentally clicked on a website called Purple Boy. This was a dating site for the gay community. On this site, Yijiang began chatting with a middle-aged man named Tang Jianxiao. Through their conversations, Jianxiao claimed he came from a wealthy family, owned a home in Haidian district, and worked for a foreign company with a high salary. When he learned about Yijiang's difficult circumstances, working himself to exhaustion while studying yet still struggling to make ends meet, Jianxiao made an offer. He would be willing to sponsor Yijiang, covering his tuition and living expenses on the condition that Yijiang come live with him. At first, Yijiang was completely clear-eyed about the nature of this relationship. He understood it was just an exchange, each person getting what they needed. He needed money for tuition to maintain his life as a student without working himself to death. Jianxiao needed a young boyfriend by his side. There was no love here, just an unspoken agreement between two adults. But people can't always control their emotions. After living together for a while, Jianxiao's care and gentleness gradually softened Yijiang's heart. For the first time in his life, someone patiently listened to him talk about his painful past, about his abandoned childhood, about the beatings from his parents, about all the wounds he had kept hidden for so long. Jianxiao comforted him, making him feel understood. He even bought Yijiang a small dog for companionship. But that happiness didn't last long. After a while, Jianxiao's attitude began to change. He grew increasingly cold and indifferent toward Yijiang, no longer showing the care he once had. Worse still, Jianxiao began introducing Yijiang to his friends, having him serve as a temporary sexual partner for them. Yijiang felt like he'd been doused with cold water. He realized he had never been special in Jianxiao's eyes, just a toy to be discarded. Anger and humiliation surged within him. He felt deceived, toyed with emotionally. But no matter how furious he was, Yijiang didn't dare resist or leave. After being supported by Jianxiao for a while, he had grown accustomed to a life without financial worries. He didn't know what he would do if he had to return to those exhausting days of working while studying. So he swallowed his humiliation and silently endured it all. At the end of November 2002, Yijiang's mental state was at its worst. During those troubled days, he turned to a Beijing gay chat room to find some relief, and there he met 4 men. They hit it off, and soon the group arranged to meet in person at a bar. That evening, they sat drinking and chatting animatedly. Yijiang felt comfortable, temporarily forgetting the troubles weighing on his mind. When the drinking session ended, the 4 men invited Yijiang to come hang out at their place. Already quite drunk, his mind hazy and no longer thinking clearly, Yijiang nodded in agreement without much thought. But when he woke up, he found himself stripped naked, his hands and feet bound tightly to a heating pipe. The 4 men took turns assaulting him, whipping him as well. The ordeal lasted over an hour. That night, after everything was over, Yijiang lay crying until dawn. This was the second time in his life he had been violated, and this time was far more brutal than before. All the wounds he had tried to bury suddenly burst open at once. The humiliation of being raped twice, the coldness of his own family, the betrayal by someone he had trusted and loved, all the pain and rage accumulated over the years exploded completely in that moment. He took out the Spanish military knife that a classmate had given him as a gift, turning it over in his hands. Yijiang began planning his revenge. From late November 2002, he frequently visited gay bars throughout Beijing to find the 4 men who had assaulted him that night. He went from bar to bar, studying every face, listening to every voice, trying to identify those who had made him a victim. Nearly 2 months passed, and finally his persistence paid off. On January 17, 2003, while at the Sanlitun Bar District, Yijiang recognized a familiar face in the crowd. It was one of the 4 men from that night. He quietly followed the man from a distance, careful not to be noticed. He tracked him through the streets, onto a bus, off the bus, and finally watched him enter a small single-story house in an alley in Fengtai District. Over the following days, Yijiang repeatedly appeared near that house, observing all of the man's activities from afar. Through his surveillance, he discovered that this person regularly visited a nearby internet cafe. This was the opportunity he needed. One afternoon, Yijiang went into that internet cafe, choosing a seat where he could observe his target without being noticed. He waited patiently. When the man stood up and left his computer, Yijiang immediately moved to the computer the man had been using. The screen was still on, and recorded his QQ number. With the QQ number in hand, Yijiang created a completely new QQ account and sent a friend request to the man. In his message, he introduced himself as gay and expressed special interest in SM. The man didn't suspect anything and quickly accepted the friend request. During their conversation, the man revealed his screen name was Fee-Charging Slave and explained that he offered SM services for 800 yuan, approximately 100 USD at the time, per night. Yijiang pretended to be extremely interested in what the man was describing. Eventually, they arranged to meet at Fee-Charging Slave's home that evening. When he arrived and knocked on the door, the man opened it and recognized Yi Jiang. A look of surprise crossed his face. But before he could say anything, Yi Jiang smiled and calmly said he had really enjoyed what they did last time. That statement completely lowered the man's guard, and he willingly let Yi Jiang tie him to the bed with rope as part of their agreed-upon SM session. Once fee-charging slave was bound tightly, completely immobilized and unable to resist, Yi Jiang slowly pulled the military knife from his pocket and plunged it hard into the man's back. The man screamed in pain, struggling uselessly. But Yi Jiang didn't stop. Watching him writhe, he stabbed several more times, each thrust away to release the rage and humiliation he had bottled up for so long, until the man went completely still, breathing no more. After it was over, Yi Jiang took out exactly 800 yuan and threw it on the nearby sofa. That was the amount fee-charging slave had quoted for one night's service. Yi Jiang meant this as an ironic payment, a way of saying he had paid in full for what the man had done to him. Then he calmly turned and left the scene. After this second killing, Yi Jiang felt an immense sense of relief, temporarily forgetting the pain of his past. After that, he didn't stop, but continued hunting for the remaining 3 men who had assaulted him. Before long, Yi Jiang found his second target near Zhongguancun. The man was a graduate student in the foreign languages department. He used the same method, first building rapport with the target online, then arranging to meet for SM in person. At the man's home, Yi Jiang first turned the stereo up loud, claiming it was to avoid disturbing the neighbors, but really to cover up what would happen next. Following their agreed-upon arrangement, Yi Jiang tied the man's hands and feet, then suddenly pulled out his military knife. In the man's terrified eyes, Yi Jiang had sex with him while slashing diagonal cuts across his body with the knife. After Yi Jiang had vented his rage, he slit the man's throat with one stroke. The third victim was the one who had abused Yi Jiang most brutally. This time, Yi Jiang's methods were even more savage. After slitting the man's throat, Yi Jiang still didn't feel satisfied, stabbing the body dozens more times. Finally, Yi Jiang cut off the man's genitals and threw them into a nearby garbage pile. Next was the fourth target. Yi Jiang killed him using the same method. After dealing with all 4 men, Yi Jiang left Jianxiao. He no longer wanted to live a life controlled by someone else. Afterward, Yi Jiang found a job at Ping An Insurance Company while continuing to look for new connections online. Before long, a man named Zhi Yuanyuan began chatting with Yi Jiang online. They quickly became close and developed a romantic relationship. They dated and gradually became boyfriends. But after being together for a while, Yi Jiang discovered Yuanyuan was secretly seeing other gay men. The feeling of betrayal once again surged powerfully within him. On March 19, 2003, Yi Jiang went to the apartment Yuanyuan was renting. Everything proceeded normally. They talked, with nothing to indicate what was about to happen. Then, when Yuanyuan wasn't paying attention, Yi Jiang suddenly made his move. He tied Yuanyuan tightly to a chair with rope, then took out his knife and killed him using his familiar methods. After Yuanyuan stopped breathing, Yi Jiang didn't rush to leave like before. He stayed in the room for a while, calmly checking around to confirm he hadn't left any traces that could lead to his discovery. Only when he was certain everything had been cleaned up did he lock the door and quietly leave. What Yi Jiang hadn't anticipated was that Yuanyuan's parents would notice something was wrong so quickly. Just 2 days later, when they couldn't reach their son, they came in person and discovered the body. He certainly hadn't expected that this case, along with the 4 previous ones, would be connected by police, and that the similarities in his methods would become the crucial leads that led to his arrest. Looking back at this series of cases, it's clear that Yi Jiang's methods followed a nearly consistent pattern from start to finish. First, he used SM as a lure on gay websites and chat rooms. He approached potential targets, chatted with them about shared interests, built trust and excitement. After establishing contact, he would arrange to meet them at their own homes. When meeting, he played the role of a normal SM participant, waiting until the target had completely let down their guard before striking. He bound them with rope, leaving them unable to resist, then carried out the killing. The murders typically included brutal acts of torture, as if he wanted to pour all his pain and hatred onto the victims' bodies. In interrogations after his arrest, Yijiang admitted something that sent chills down the investigators' spines. He said that only when committing these crimes, when playing the role of someone in complete control over another's fate, did he experience a satisfaction and joy he had never known before. His entire life, he had always been the one controlled, beaten, violated, betrayed. But with a knife in his hand, standing before a helpless victim, he held the power of life and death for the first time. That feeling of absolute power became increasingly addictive. Initially, he killed for revenge, wanting those who had humiliated him to pay the price. But gradually, the line between revenge and killing for pleasure blurred. He couldn't stop anymore, and what began as vengeance transformed into an endless chain of serial murder. On April 28, 2004, more than a year after his arrest, the Beijing number 1 Intermediate People's Court officially opened proceedings for Li Yijiang's serial murder case. The trial attracted significant attention from the public and media. In court, Yijiang appeared in prison uniform, hair cut short, his expression strangely calm. Facing the indictment from prosecutors detailing the 5 murders he had committed, Yijiang admitted to everything. He didn't deny, didn't defend himself, didn't raise any objections. He simply sat there listening and nodding to confirm each charge. But when the judge asked about his motive, why he had killed these people, Yijiang's emotions showed their first sign of disturbance. The calm expression on his face disappeared. He raised his voice, nearly shouting, saying that those people had taken turns assaulting him. They had humiliated him, tortured him, turned him into a plaything. And only after killing them did he feel relief. However, regarding Yijiang's testimony, both during the trial and in subsequent investigations, considerable controversy and doubt emerged. Many expressed skepticism about his story. Yijiang claimed he was gang-raped by 4 men that night, yet afterward he was somehow able to easily track down all 4 of their homes and QQ numbers in a sprawling city of tens of millions of people. Even stranger, when Yijiang appeared before them to carry out his revenge, 3 of the 4 didn't even recognize him, as if they had completely forgotten the face of the victim they had once brutalized. This made many wonder, did events really happen as Yijiang described? Another contradiction was raised. According to Yijiang's account, all 4 men had played the dominant, controlling role in SM on the night they assaulted him. But strangely, in the subsequent SM meetings when Yijiang sought them out for revenge, all 4 were willing to let Yijiang tie them up, taking the submissive role. Those familiar with the SM community know that roles in SM tend to be fixed. Someone who likes to dominate rarely agrees to be dominated, and vice versa. The fact that all 4 could easily switch roles like this is hard to believe. Based on these contradictions, many speculated that Yijiang may have fabricated the story of being gang-raped after his arrest, trying to cast himself as a victim, creating a justifiable reason for murder, and thereby reducing his culpability in court. Additionally, there was controversy surrounding Yijiang's sexual orientation. He claimed he discovered his attraction to the same sex after being assaulted by the strange man as a young teen, as if that traumatic event had changed his sexual orientation. But examining the timeline more closely, his confession of love to Tang, the classmate he later killed, occurred in early 1994, half a year before he was assaulted in December of that year. This proves Yijiang already had feelings for the same sex before being violated. His sexual orientation wasn't a consequence of rape, but appeared to be innate. Many believed his blaming the assault was just a way to hide the shame of being gay, something still heavily stigmatized in Chinese society at that time. During the trial, Yijiang's defense attorneys tried their best to seek a reduced sentence for their client. They presented in detail Yijiang's tragic upbringing. A child abandoned from birth, growing up in an environment of constant domestic violence, beaten by his own parents and siblings, then sexually assaulted by a stranger while still a teenager. All that accumulated psychological trauma, the lawyers argued, had contributed to pushing Yijiang down this criminal path. They requested the court consider these factors and deliver a lighter sentence. However, the prosecution firmly opposed this. They pointed out that no matter how tragic Yi Jiang's past may have been, it could not justify what he had done. His methods were extremely cruel, calculated, and meticulously prepared in advance. The circumstances of the cases were particularly severe, causing terror in the community. Furthermore, throughout the investigation and trial, Yi Jiang showed no signs of remorse or regret for what he had done. For all these reasons, the prosecution requested the court impose the death penalty in accordance with the law. After weighing all factors, the first instance court delivered its final verdict. Li Yijiang was sentenced to death, with deprivation of political rights for life. When he heard the verdict, Yijiang showed little reaction. He just nodded slightly, as if he had known this outcome all along. After the trial, he announced he would waive his right to appeal and accept the court's sentence. But then, on the very last day of the statutory appeal period, when everyone thought the case was closed, Yijiang suddenly changed his mind. He filed an appeal with the Beijing Higher People's Court, arguing that his actions stemmed from revenge, not unprovoked intentional murder. He hoped a higher court would reconsider and deliver a lighter sentence. In July 2004, the Beijing Higher People's Court opened an appellate hearing to review Yijiang's appeal. After thoroughly studying the entire case file and hearing arguments from both sides, the appellate court issued its final decision: uphold the original verdict, reject Yijiang's appeal. The death sentence was now final. On the morning of August 20th, 2004, a prison transport vehicle carried Li Yijiang away from the detention center toward the execution grounds. It was the day his sentence would be carried out. Before departing, under legal provisions, Yijiang was permitted one final meeting with his family. His parents had flown from Xinjiang to Beijing to see their son one last time. The meeting took place in a small, cold, and empty room. His mother sat there, but her eyes were glazed and unfocused. Due to her mental illness, she had taken a large dose of sedatives before the trip, and at that moment her mind was completely hazy. She didn't understand what was happening, didn't know that the son she had given birth to was about to be executed. Perhaps that was a small mercy within the tragedy, for no mother could bear the moment of sending her child to their death. Yijiang looked at his mother, and for the first time since his arrest, tears welled in his eyes. He forced a smile and gently told her he was going abroad to study, that he would be away for a long time, and she should take care of herself. His mother just nodded vacantly, saying nothing, as if she was listening but didn't truly understand. Then Yijiang turned to his father, the man who had once chased him through the house with a knife, the man who had made his childhood a living hell. But in that final moment, there was no hatred or resentment. Yijiang only asked his father one thing: please treat mother well. His father remained silent, his weathered face showing no expression, but his shoulders trembled slightly. The meeting ended. Yijiang was led away. And later that same day, the death sentence was carried out. Li Yijiang was executed by firing squad at just 24 years of age, ending a life that was short but filled with tragedy and crime. Looking back at the entire story, Li Yijiang's case is a tragedy with no winners. He was once an abandoned child, growing up amid violence and without love. He was once a victim of assault and betrayal, but instead of finding ways to heal his wounds, he chose a path of bloody revenge, transforming himself from victim into murderer. The trauma of his past may explain the warping of his soul, but it can never justify the crimes he committed. In the end, Yijiang was both victim and perpetrator in the tragedy of his own life. And that concludes today's case. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.